Welcome to the Introduction to Human-Computer Interaction. So let's start with the definition of the field. So human-computer interaction is concerned with the design, evaluation and implementation of interactive systems for human use and with the major phenomena surrounding them. This early definition goes back to 1992 and comes from this field of HCI. So there's alternative terms like human-machine communication, human-machine interaction, man-machine interaction, man-machine interfaces, or ergonomics. You might find them, and they're often used synonymously. So what identifies human-computer interaction? It is a field of research. So we are studying the interaction of people, or users, with and through computers. So that can involve the hardware and or the software that is involved with that. So on this slide, for example, you see a study in which 3 different visualization techniques have been compared. So imagine you are walking through a city, you're using your smartphone as a navigation device, and you have something you want to reach at, maybe a museum. So what would be a good visualization technique to actually see that the museum is not so far away, but it's not exactly on the part of the map you are looking at? So here 3 different visualizations: a triangle, an arrow, and a part of a circle have been compared and studied which work best. But HCI is also a field of designing. So we are designing and creating new interactive technologies for the interaction between people and computers. And again, this can involve hardware and it can involve software. So what we see here is from our research projects in which we developed a new visualization techniques on a head-mounted display in which we try to reduce acoustic alarms on intensive care units by using visual signals for alarms and also using bone-conducted audio. This device was not existing before, so it was built in a creative process. So we also did a new design in a certain field where there was no interaction solution which was good at the time and which was avoiding acoustic alarms, which can be very annoying on an intensive care unit. So going forward, so why HCI? I think the 2 children on the right side showing, we want to have interfaces between humans and computers that are not only effective, but they are efficient, they are pleasant. You see 2 happy individuals, and this is because human-computer interaction has worked. But it's not only a question of pleasure, of joy, it's also a question of safety and more in our environments. So for example, if you look at this scenario where someone is driving along a street, you might not see that the bicyclist is coming from the right, even though the cyclist has the right to cycle and you should stop. You might overlook the individual. So can human-computer interaction also contribute that you are more safe, for example, in this case, indicating to the driver that there's an out-of-view object that he or she should paying attention to. So that's also a field where what we are addressing, so not only efficiency, satisfaction, but also the safety. There's 2 common misconceptions you hear a lot and still hear today when we talk about new systems, interactive devices. So if the developer can use it, everybody can use it. But that's not true. So the diagram here shows that the experimenter on one side says, well, but this is not how it's supposed to be used. The users are getting it all wrong. Well, this is not true. If the user is getting it the way he or she does get it, that's how she used it. And there's no way you could say, no, you're just doing this wrong. You haven't obviously, for example, hit the user tasks, the user's demand, the user didn't understand what the interface was for. So the misconception is that the experimenter, the developer, the designer is the one that knows how to use it, But that's actually not true, and you can see it on many standard systems we find still today. The other misconception is that something like human-computer interface is something like polishing at the end. And the interfaces we're doing at the end. And you have a very nice and easy to understand diagram here from an enterprise user interface. And even though you haven't used it, you can easily imagine that working with it might not necessarily be easy, might not necessarily be effective, and maybe also not pleasant or satisfactory. So making the system look nicer at the end is definitely not what the human-computer interaction field wants to do, but it wants to involve users very early, and it has an important role in the later usage of any interactive system. But what is a user interface? Well, this is the natural user interfaces we see a lot. So we have a keyboard, we have a computer, we have a display, and we are interacting, for example, with this presentation. It's the space where the interaction between humans and machines occur. But this is not only for the laptop computers. I brought you some pictures of the user interfaces of today in fields in which we are also working. So we have on one side maybe even a bicycle which is augmented by a display for navigation, but also maybe here in this case by vibrators that help you, for example, finding objects on the left or on the right. So with this augmentation we have instrumented an existing thing, the bicycle, with an interactive system to help individuals to navigate easier in a touristic area, as this was the case. Or the other thing, we have our smart homes. They are no longer just the couch and the lamp. Many of these displays became interactive. They have displays, they have sensors, and with the miniaturization, we find ubiquitous interfaces like this in many situations of our daily lives. But the interfaces are also everywhere where we work. You see a monitor and an interactive display in an intensive care unit where the nurse is taking care and is revisiting patient signals and maybe entering information. That is user interfaces we are also dealing with. Recently, the last 10 years, we moved strongly into virtual reality. So we can now not only design the spaces in real-world environments, but we also design interaction in virtual reality. Many of the systems became wearable. We see a very nice jewelry. It's an interactive display we designed for regular water intake, sort of to encourage you to regularly drink a glass of water during the day. And due to the accessibility of electronics, computing power, you can also create, design, and study interfaces like this, and as well as some on your mobile phones, as indicated here with the mobile navigation system in the car. So they are not so clear as our laptop, which is just in front of us on our desk. They are omnipresent. They are often hardly even perceived as computers, because we are not really consciously interacting with them in a sense of display, but they are sort of integrated in our daily lives. What is very important to understand in HCI is the interface, the computer, and the human. So the human interaction, the human-computer interaction involves the human, and with the human it involves all of the sensory system of the human. So the images here on this slide just illustrate the richness of the human sensory system, the human interaction abilities. You can jump, you can hear, you have very strong cognitive abilities, but you might also have different of these capabilities with different individuals. So it's very important that we include these kinds of capabilities of humans into our design to really meet the individual's user's needs. The human in human-computer interaction is not only identified by maybe the different sensory, cognitive, physical abilities we are, but we are also very different individuals. So if the world were 100 people, there's a very famous statistic out there, there would be very many different situations in which individuals find themselves in. So 25 would be children, and there would be 75 adults, and So in different countries, there would be 60 Asians in 100 people, there would be 16 Africans, 14 people from the Americans, and 10 Europeans. Imagine only 7 out of 100 would have a college degree. 40 would have an internet connection. 86 would be able to read and write, but 14 would not. I think these figures very clearly show how different the individuals we are designing for and we are creating new interactive technology for vary, and we really definitely need to address this very early on in our design process. So the interaction, actually, we had the interface, the human, and now the interaction, is actually defined as the information flow from a system, maybe a computer or car, to a person back and forth. So we talk about the interaction as a dynamic system, as a feedback loop, as a first approximation. So we see three examples. What would be from our daily life? We have a smartwatch that is indicating different apps, and we are interacting with the smartwatch as one option. But it might also be in a production or in a control center where we have a multitude of different devices, buttons, controllers, joysticks, that we are interacting with a very complex system, which is not only one entity like a smartwatch app, but maybe a really larger control center. And we are more and more sort of immersing them in our sort of sensory system, like the large amount of touch interfaces as we see here in the interaction with the tablet. But you could imagine that interaction is clearly defined, but actually there is a critique on the definition of interaction in the human-computer interaction field. So it's actually a disagreement, and I just brought you 2 examples which are illustrating. So there's one researcher, Alex Taylor, that is really deeply discussing that the fact that we think of an interface as a material thing, you know, it has led HCI to concentrate to just sort of this interface, on this material connection between me and the computing interface. And the other side, we've also found 2 respected researchers, Hornbeck and Ulas Wirta, who think it is not this folk notion of human are engaged in some interplay, but you really have to look what kind of interaction types are there, what are the key concepts, and we will look later in this lecture into these and understand how are they described, how are they characterized, and what do they mean for our field. So, at the end, I would like to stress that human-computer interaction is a multidisciplinary field. Very often, actually, researchers get asked, if I tell them about my research, oh, isn't that psychology? I said, no, it's a field in computer science too. Others would say, oh, isn't that sociology? Yeah, yes, but it's only a part of it. So you have human-computer interaction with all the facets and the variety you see here. It's computer science, it's psychology, it's economics and human factors. It's also engineering and design. It has something to do with semiotics and branding. It involves ethnography, sociology, and linguistics, and maybe there's other fields that are not already mentioned here. So it's a very multidisciplinary field, which means also your team in which you will be working in your future should be reflecting this. Either you have members from different fields, or you are working together with them in a cooperative project to design your human-computer interaction.